So thank you all for coming here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, and most of you do, but for those of you who don't, my name is Simon Green. I'm the education manager for the Escondido Creek Conservancy, and we sponsor this lecture series. This is the third out of 6 for 2016, and we call them TECC Talks. And no, it's not because they're about technology. It's because the acronym for the Escondido Creek Conservancy is TECC. And these are nature-based lecture series. Today, we're fortunate enough to have Dr. Michael Wall. He's with the Natural History Museum in Balboa Park. And I met Michael at a summit, a watershed summit, and we got to talking, and within 5 minutes, he was all set to do the presentation. So I was very impressed with his enthusiasm. And so the talk tonight is entitled Insect Trail Tales, and he's going to be talking about insects specific to San Diego County, correct? He's the curator of entomology at the NAT, and for those of you who don't know what entomology is, it's the study of insects. And he knows way more about it than I do, so I will let him get started.
So even though I might know more about entomology than Simon does, I know that probably a lot of you all know a fair amount about entomology yourselves, particularly if you are lifelong residents of San Diego and have been wandering the trails of San Diego for most of your life, then you're going to know a lot of interesting things and have seen a lot of interesting things over the course of your life. And so if, while I'm giving this, the spirit talks to you, and you'd like to raise your hand and tell us an interesting observation that you've seen about something that I'm talking about, or if you go, well, I'm not sure you got that exactly right, I am acceptable of correction because everybody makes mistakes every once in a while. So I am going to talk about, because here we are in this beautiful, nature reserve here, and I know that there's docent walks that are held on a regular basis here. And so when I have gone on docent walks or trail walks in Torrey Pines or Mission Trails or in a variety of other places throughout San Diego, I often hear a lot of stories about plants. Okay, why? Because plants stay still. Okay, they don't move around a lot. There's going to be an interesting plant story around the corner because it was there last week and it's still going to be there this week. And you might hear cool stories about birds, because oftentimes you can hear birds from afar, even if you can't see them. And mammals, you might hear some cool stories about mammals because you might see tracks or scat and stuff like that. But I'm often disappointed in the number of insect stories that I hear when I'm out on the trail. Now that's just because I'm an entomologist, and of course I'm going to be disappointed. I want to hear lots of stories about insects. Why do I want to hear lots of stories about insects? Because insects are the crown of the tree of life. And what do I mean by that? This thing over here is a family tree for all of life. And each one of the triangles represents the relative number of species that are in that group. So this is 100,000 species. The angiosperms, which are the flowering plants, have about 214-ish described species in them. But who's up there at the top? It's the hexapods, which is just a fancy name for the insects, that have over 1 million described species. That's 1 million described species. But then when you talk to the scientists who kind of are deep in the depths of the Amazon rainforest or in lots of places, even Baja California, where there's lots of still undiscovered species, they'll tell you that that number is more like somewhere around 4 to even as high as 7 million species of insects on the face of the planet. So there's a lot of diversity that we know about that's out there, but there's also a lot of diversity that we're still in the process of describing and discovering. So there's a lot to do within the realm of entomology. Now, if you were to take all the insects in North America and put them into a pizza pie, all right, this would be about the relative composition of the major taxonomic groups of insects. You got a whole lot of beetles. There's this old saying amongst at least entomologists that God must have had an inordinate fondness for beetles because 1 out of every 5 animals on the planet is a beetle. Then there's also the butterflies, there's the flies, the bees, wasps, and ants. And then this group that we call the true bugs, which are things like cicadas and stink bugs and aphids and all these things with piercing sucking mouth parts. And then every other group that you can think of, like grasshoppers and mantids and roaches and all that sort of stuff, fall into this other group. So within this big group that we call the insects, there's also all these other really big groups, like the beetles have 350,000 described species of beetles, so that's a lot of beetles. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about are what I call trail stories, all right? And so these are stories that when you're out on the trail, what can you have that you can pull out of your hip pocket if you're a docent to tell a story or to tell your children, or marvel your friends that you're on a hike with, okay? And so this one is probably, in some ways, the most boring, but also the most dependable story for you to have when you're out on the trail. And there's all these things that are called the primitive hexapods, or the primitive insects. And so there's these little cute things that are called springtails. This one is, and this one is a springtail. And the reason why they're called springtails is because they've got a little lever in their abdomen that when they're alarmed, they will go poop and pop the lever, and then they shoot up in the air. So they kind of bounce around up in the air. And then these things called proturans and diplurans and things like that. You're never going to see any of these. That's not totally true, because sometimes people encounter a whole bunch of columbella, particularly early in the spring in patches of water. If you've ever seen a little patch of water that was covered with a film of purple things, little purple things, those are all columbellans, a specific type of columbollan. But the story here, if you're never going to see them, how can I tell a trail story about this, Michael? The story here is that they are always underneath your feet. So everywhere where you are on the trail, there's primitive hexapods below you. And so what I did here is that I went and I got a 1 gallon Ziploc bag, and I went underneath a lemonade berry bush, all right? And I gathered up leaf litter from that lemonade berry bush, and I stuffed it in my Ziploc bag. And then I took it back to the lab, and I put it in this thing called a burr lazy funnel. And what a burr lazy funnel is a funnel that's got a screen of like hardware cloth across the top of it, chicken wire-ish kind of stuff. Put all that leaf litter on top of that, and then I shine a bright light above it. And as you shine the bright light, it starts to dry that leaf litter out. And everything that's in that leaf litter starts going, away from the light instead of towards the light, away from the light. And they go down and they go down, and they fall down through the funnel, and they land in a little petri dish filled with alcohol. Okay? And that's what you see here. Yes, surprise! You did want to go towards the light. Get away from the light. Yeah. So, and that's what you see here. And so there's all sorts of things in this picture. There's a bunch of maggots, so fly larvae. These are different types of fly larvae that are in here. There's also some beetle larvae that are right here, and there's another one right there. There's a little beetle right there. But in all these red block boxes are all these little primitive hexapods called springtails. In each one of those boxes, including this one, I need to fix this slide, this one should be a red box as well. But each one of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are a different species of springtail. So it's a different species of these little primitive hexapods. Why do I know that? Because I posted this picture on Flickr, and some guy in the Netherlands identified him for me. And then also we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 species of mites, which are more closely related to spiders, but still, all these things are living down there underneath the soil. So just between those two, I think that's like around 11 species. And then you add all of the other things. And in that picture, there's at least 25 different species that were underneath there. And what are they doing? They're eating up, they're processing that leaf litter, they're actively chewing it, kind of thing. Or they might be eating the fungus that's decomposing that leaf litter, or they might be eating the other things that are eating that leaf litter, right? So you've got an entire little ecosystem that's always down there underneath our feet, and it's super duper important, right? Because if they're not doing that, then all that decomposition is not happening, and all those nutrients that are in all that leaf litter don't become available for the plants later on. So that one's always there for you. That one's always in your back pocket, okay? Now, if it's hot, and you're walking around on the trails, then oftentimes or out in the parking lot, you're going to scare up grasshoppers, okay? And when you scare some of them up, sometimes they do this, they make a noise. Have you noticed that? It sounds like it's like a noise, and that's called crepitation, all right? And sometimes when they take flight, you might notice that the undersides of the wings are brightly colored. They can be bright red, they can be bright yellow, sometimes even some of them are blue and green. So the question is, what's the story with that? One, what are they making that noise for? And why do you like really brightly colored? Because right there, you're blended in, right? That's good camouflage. That's not good camouflage. So why make a noise and be all colorful, you know? And so there's two kind of competing hypotheses on this. One is it can be like a male-female thing, like maybe it's males asking for a date in some sort of way, okay? And then the other hypothesis that someone came up with way back in the 1900s, and some people think that it's got a lot of credibility, is the idea that they are creating a false search image for predators. So what's their main predator? Mostly birds, okay? So as a bird is coming along and one of these things pops up and it goes, which is like, okay, cued in on that. All right, look at me. I've got red wings, and then you've noticed before they just drop, and then you can't see them on the ground anymore because their wings have disappeared. So they're creating a false search image. Look, I've got red wings. I'm big and tasty, and then drop in silence and camouflaged. So it's this idea of disrupting the search image in order to avoid predation. There's also one more kind of interesting hypothesis that I was just reading about today as I was preparing this, is that, that this does have to do with males trying to show off in some sort of way to the females, because by making noise and flashing these big red colors around, you know, and surviving, that means you must have lots of, you know, vigor. You must be a strong dude kind of thing. It's kind of like the same reason that they think peacocks have such big tails. That by having such a big tail and being able to have, because then that would be a hindrance, you know, to fly and all that sort of stuff. This allows the females to judge and go, ooh, well, if he can do that, he might be a good day. So this is the Jerusalem cricket.
Just real quick, so only the males have the color.
No, see, that's one of the, so it's not, with different species, it's different. Okay, so there's some where both males and females do, so that kind of is a knock against that idea. And that's why I sort of like this other idea more that has to do with the false search imagery thing. But there are species where the males only have it. And it is clear, like people have done behavioral studies, where it is clear that the females are responding to these noise flights. Yeah.
We fed a Jerusalem cricket to our San Diego alligator.
Did it like it?
Yeah, we found two.
Was the Jerusalem cricket already dead when you fed it to him?
No.
Did he fight?
They
Not really? Oh, I'm surprised, because they can be pretty vicious.
they bite.
Yeah, they will bite you. So this is the Jerusalem cricket. This is one of the most common calls I get at the San Diego Natural History Museum. Because I play this game of kind of like name that tune when I get calls about insects. And this one I can usually name in one note because it's alien is the first thing that people say, or giant termite, that's another one. And if that was a giant termite, you would be in big trouble. If you're not familiar with Jerusalem crickets, they can be about as big as your thumb, okay, when they're full grown and an adult. South of the border, they're called Niños de Terra, the children of the earth, because they supposedly have a child's-like face. The Navajo in New Mexico, I think it's in New Mexico, I can't remember, called them the red skull insects, again, because of this red skull-like face that they've got. In Baja California, at least, they're thought to be venomous, which they are not, you know, but it's like the folk tale is that they're venomous. And I travel in Baja California quite a bit to collect, and we often get local guides to take us up into remote areas, up in the mountains. And I caught one of these one time, and they thought I was like the bravest man on the face of the planet, which they were incredibly cool guys, and so I felt like, whoa, I'm just out a little bit there. But one of the really interesting stories about Jerusalem crickets is an interaction that they have with a thing called a horsetail worm. Okay. So I don't know if you've ever encountered this. Some folks who've been on the road or been on the trails a lot have possibly encountered this. But sometimes you'll walk up to a puddle, or people will find these in their swimming pools sometimes. And you'll have a dead Jerusalem cricket in the puddle, and you'll have this really long thing called a horsehair worm. And so this is a story of parasitism, all right? But the horsetail worm is completely aquatic, all right? So, but Jerusalem crickets are completely terrestrial. So how do the two get together? And the story is that we'll just start off with two horsetail worms in a pond together. They mate, okay? They have fertilized eggs. Those fertilized eggs hatch, all right? And out come these really little tiny squirmy larvae. They're super squirmy, like so squirmy it's like, isn't that obnoxiously squirmy? Like, aren't you going to attract predators by being that squirmy? But that's exactly what they want to do, okay, is attract predators. And particularly predators being a lot of aquatic insect larvae, okay? Because a lot of aquatic insect larvae, like dragonfly larvae and mayflies, they are going to turn into flying, right? So that's how we get out of the water and into the terrestrial world. Now, I forgot to mention, they lay a lot of eggs, okay? We're talking millions of eggs because this is a lottery game of trying to get onto land, first of all, because many things aren't going to survive being a little aquatic larvae, okay? But they eventually get onto land by turning into a cyst, just like a little pellet inside of, let's say, a dragonfly or a damselfly. And that damselfly might live a full life and eventually die and fall to the ground. It might get eaten by some sort of vertebrate and have its parts scattered around through both feces and just through the part of breaking up. Well, these things are what we call detritivores. They eat dead organic matter. They'll eat just about anything, including dead insects that are on the ground. So eventually, if they're lucky, all right, or not lucky in the case of the Jerusalem cricket, they will eat something that has a cyst of one of these horsehair worms in it. And that horsehair worm cyst goes into its body. Once it's in there, it kind of chemically knows, I'm inside of Jerusalem cricket now, okay? And it breaks out of its cyst form, bores through the digestive tract, and kind of lives in the body cavity of the Jerusalem cricket, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It doesn't even have a mouth. It just absorbs nutrients from its body wall, okay? And so eventually it gets so big that it's time to move on in life, but it's got to get back to the water. Remember, it's aquatic. It's got to get back to the water. So this is an image from a graphic novel that the museum's almost ready to put out on this whole entire process. And we call it Zombie Crickets and Love Worms. Okay? And what happens is that, yes, the crickets become zombified. Okay? They, in some way, and it might just be the sheer mass of them storing up so much space, but the crickets feel dehydrated. I'm not sure, I haven't delved into the literature enough if they're biochemically like influencing the brain of the crickets to think that they feel dehydrated, or if something about them physically being in them is actually making them dehydrated. But they feel dehydrated, insatiably dehydrated, so much so that even when they get to a pool of water and they drink and they drink and they drink and they drink, they can never feel dehydrated enough until they basically drown themselves, at which time these guys pop outside and the whole life cycle starts all over again. So really bizarro story of parasitism, and there's tons more like that if you're interested in parasites, alternation of generations. There's tons of cool stories. Yeah.
Is that the only host?
I'm not sure about the host. There's lots of different species of horsehair worms, and I'm not sure about the host specificity of individual species. But, you know, if it was on something else, it would probably be another, like, grasshopper, cricket kind of thing. They're certainly not, like, one of the things that we make a point of in our graphic novel is that you are not a host, your dog's not a host, you know, all those sorts of things. So they're definitely invertebrates. So I don't really have much of a trail story here to tell you with mantids other than I think mantids are really cool. And that if you encounter them out on the trail and have an opportunity to interact with a praying mantid, then you should take the time to do so, because they are very charismatic in terms of an insect. They are highly visual, and so they will track you. You can kind of shake your finger in front of them and they will track your finger. I took this photograph and I felt like it was going, look what I got, you know. And they're also, you know, we hear about this idea of fight or flight in nature, right? That when something is in a bad situation, it will either try to get away or it's going to fight. And mantids, I feel like 9 times out of 10 are ready to fight. And so if you shake your finger in front of them, they'll kind of raise up their forearms and try to battle it out with you. So mantids are neat. If you see them out on the trail, definitely stop, interact with them for a little while, and then leave them to do their business, because they're cool little critters. Yep.
We've had praying mantis eggs, and we hatched them, and my mom said there were like 300 in them.
Yeah, there's a whole ton of them. Though. Well, I should have a picture of that up there, because the egg cases look really interesting, don't they? Yeah, they look kind of like foam a little bit, really dried foam and lots of little layers. And yeah, there's tons of babies inside of them. I've heard stories from school teachers of having room full of little baby mantids one day after. Yeah.
Yeah, the private flight story, last year we were in a building and there was a praying mantis on a green valve that we were going to work on. We were just kind of looking at it, and then we got our things ready and we thought, well, we need to shoo it along its way. And the worst thing we did was shoo it along its way, because it started flying off. And it did get 12 foot up. We were watching it, and all of a sudden this bird came out of it.
Yeah. Well, the infamous image that I've seen floating around online is a picture of a big old praying mantid feeding on a hummingbird and a hummingbird.
Are any of the insects territorial?
There are definitely, and I'm going to talk about one in particular that's territorial later on. I'm not sure what the story with mantids are in terms of territoriality, but I wouldn't be surprised, particularly if the males were territorial.
So real quick, it's mantid is the correct term, not mantis?
It's both. It's both, yeah. Yeah.
And so that video you were talking about with eating a hummingbird, do you think that's real?
Yeah.
Because we've seen it too. We've watched.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. No, I think it's true for sure. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So another group that you won't necessarily see, but it's such a cool story of desert adaptation. And when we say desert, like we're speaking of all of San Diego, right? We live in a dry enough climate that we're close enough to desert, even here on the coast. But these are the sand roaches, and this is a female, and she's burrowing down into the sand right now. And the males have wings. You've possibly seen males at your the light outside your door. You know, they're attracted to lights. They won't come into your home.